Compliance markets for carbon and for emissions in general are really markets that are existing within a government-mandated cap-and-trade program. These markets go all the way back to the 90s when the US EPA regulated SO2 emissions for acid rain. That was when you heard talks about defoliating trees in the Northeast and acidification of bodies of water. US EPA came in and put a program in place where they placed a cap on the amount of SO2 emissions that a utility would be able to emit. And they allowed those utility companies to trade with one another to reach those goals. So it was a declining cap that went down each year and reduced the overall amount of sulfur dioxide in the atmosphere. Greenhouse gas emissions markets function very similarly. There are regional greenhouse gas emissions markets. There are multinational greenhouse gas emissions markets. There are state-based emissions markets. And they all generally operate under this cap and trade concept, where a government body, be it state or regional or multinational, will come in, place a cap on the amount of emissions allowed within a specific area, and that cap is generally declining over a set number of years. And then the companies or entities that are regulated under that cap will need to meet their goals either through internal reductions. So fuel switching would be a classic example, switching from coal to wind, for instance, if you're a utility company. Or if they can't do those emissions reductions internally, they can look outside to other companies that are able to exceed their reduction targets and purchase some of those excess reductions from them. There are several exchanges, both in the US and in Europe, that service the emissions markets. The primary function that those exchanges provide is data transparency for one. So they have daily publication of volumes and settlement prices and trade data that occurred on those exchanges. They also provide a clearing service, so they alleviate counterparty credit risk associated with transactions that might occur between two parties. Exchanges, can also provide liquidity in some instances. So there are, depending on the market, there is, varying liquidity both on the exchanges and in the over-the-counter market. And so as these markets have started to grow, the liquidity obviously has gotten better over time. From an exchange standpoint, there are separate contracts listed for each of those different markets, different products for each individual market. So in the U.S., for instance, our most liquid greenhouse gas emissions product would be the California emissions trading system. In Europe, it would be the European market. There are smaller, slightly less liquid markets. In the UK, they have their own separate market. They have split away from the European emissions trading system. In the US, we have a larger body called the Western Climate Initiative. That includes Quebec and Nova Scotia and the state of Washington, state of California, but really those all generally operate fairly independently. And so when you look at exchange contracts, typically there's an individual contract for each one of those different regions. The delivery of emissions within a futures contract takes place primarily via the registry accounts that are maintained by the state or local governments. That registry account would belong to a particular utility company. If that utility company went into a futures contract to sell and took that contract to delivery, they would then transfer that credit out of their account into the account of the buyer who was on the buy side of that transaction. Most futures accounts do not go to delivery, but in the case of emissions markets, they have a much higher rate of delivery than some of the traditional, ag and other commodity markets. But I think through the growth of environmental markets and the rapid adoption of new cleaner energy technologies, and the overall public's desire to see cleaner, greener products, be they electricity products or retail products or what have you, I think that's really what is driving the energy transition in the U.S. And I think a similar story could be said for Europe as well. Whether or not the specific markets that are there today, the California market, the Regional Greenhouse Gas Initiative, the EUA market, et cetera, whether those themselves grow in size or bring in new states or new regions, et cetera, I think that remains to be seen. But certainly these markets are proliferating in various corners of the globe, and I think that's likely to continue over the next 20 years or so.